I went back. 3 months after I limped out of those mountains with a destroyed ankle and a story I couldn't tell anyone, I went back to the exact spot where I saw them. I don't know what I was looking for. Proof, maybe? Closure. Some explanation for what happened that would let me sleep again. What I found was worse than nothing. The cairn I'd seen them build, the stack of rocks that appeared while I slept, was still there, but bigger now. 3 feet tall instead of 2, fresh rocks on top. They'd been back, multiple times, and carved into the bark of the tree next to it, fresh cuts, maybe a week old, were marks. Deliberate marks. 4 parallel lines, repeated, over and over, like they were counting, or waiting, or marking time until something. I left that forest and I haven't been back since. But what I saw in those 5 days, in February 2024, that stayed with me. And I think it always will. This is what happened. All of it. Exactly as I remember. God help me. I wish I could forget. My name is David Mitchell. I'm 36 years old. I work as a wilderness guide in Idaho. I've been hiking and camping in the backcountry for over 15 years. I've done solo trips that lasted 2 weeks. I've guided groups through some of the most challenging terrain in the Northwest. I know how to read animal signs. I know the difference between normal forest sounds and something that doesn't belong. What I experienced in those 5 days in February shattered everything I thought I knew about the natural world. And at the end of this story, there's something captured on my GPS watch that I still can't explain. I'll show you in a few minutes. It started simple enough. I'd been planning a solo winter trek for months. February is one of my favorite times to go out. The crowds are gone, the forest is quiet, and if you have the right gear and experience, winter camping can be incredibly peaceful. I chose a route in the Selkirk Mountains, about 60 miles northeast of Coeur d'Alene. Dense, old-growth forest, steep mountain terrain, miles and miles of wilderness, where humans rarely go. The plan was 5 days, 4 nights. Start at a remote trailhead, hike in about 16 miles to my first camp, then spend the next few days exploring deeper into the backcountry before looping back. I packed carefully. 0-degree sleeping bag, 4-season tent, water filtration, emergency beacon, 10 days of food. My grandfather's old .357 revolver, not because I expected trouble, but because it's smart practice in grizzly country. February 14th, Valentine's Day. I remember laughing about that as I drove to the trailhead. While everyone else was buying flowers, I was about to spend 5 days in freezing temperatures, sleeping on snow, eating freeze-dried food. I parked my truck at 9 a.m., no other vehicles. The parking area was buried under 3 feet of snow that looked undisturbed for weeks. I strapped on my snowshoes, shouldered my 60-pound pack, and started walking. The first few hours were exactly what I expected. Beautiful winter forest, towering pines, the crisp bite of cold air, the satisfying crunch of breaking trail through fresh powder. I felt alive, strong, confident. I had no idea what was waiting for me out there. The first day was uneventful. I covered about 16 miles in 7 hours. Reached Clearwater Creek just before sunset and found a perfect campsite in a small clearing surrounded by massive white pines. Temperature was dropping fast, probably down to 15 degrees, but I had good gear. Set up my tent, built a fire using a bow drill, filtered water from the frozen creek, made dinner. As darkness fell, I sat by my fire and felt that deep sense of contentment that only comes from being completely alone in the wilderness. No cell service, no emails, just me and the forest and the stars. Normal night sounds, whined through the pines, ice cracking on the creek, an owl calling. Farther off, wolves howling. I was in my sleeping bag by 9 p.m., warm and comfortable. I slept like a rock. When I woke up the next morning, I had no idea that everything was about to change. Day 2 started peacefully. I woke before dawn, got my fire going, made coffee. The sunrise was spectacular, pink and orange light through the trees, making the snow glow. My plan was to do a big loop, leave most of my heavy gear at camp and take just a day pack. Water, snacks, camera, first aid kit. I wanted to explore a ridge system about 2 miles east that looked interesting on satellite imagery. I set out around 8 a.m., clear day, cold maybe 20 degrees with almost no wind. Perfect conditions. The terrain got steeper as I approached the ridge. Some sections required scrambling over snow-covered boulders, but the views were worth it. Mountain ranges stretching to the horizon in every direction. I stopped around 11 a.m., sitting on a fallen log, eating jerky while taking photos. Everything felt normal. Everything felt right. Then, I saw the tracks. I was getting ready to move on when I noticed them. About 30 yards ahead, in a small clearing, marks in the snow caught my attention. At first, I thought they might be elk. But as I got closer, I realized these weren't elk prints. They weren't any animal prints I recognized. I knelt down and just stared for probably 5 minutes. The print was massive. I pulled out my measuring tape. 18 inches long, maybe 8 or 9 inches wide at the ball of the foot. 5 toes, clearly visible, arranged like human toes, with the big toe on the inside. But these toes were longer, thicker, and at the tip of each one, a small impression that looked like a claw mark. The heel was massive and rounded. The arch was pronounced. You could see the gap in the middle where the arch didn't touch the snow, and the depth. Based on how deep it had sunk, I estimated at least 400 pounds, maybe more. I've been tracking animals for 15 years. I know elk, I know moose, I know bear, I know mountain lion. This wasn't any of those. I spent maybe 20 minutes examining that first print, taking photos from every angle, measuring every detail. Then I started following the trail. More prints leading into the forest. And the stride length. I measured heel to heel, 4 feet, sometimes 4.5 feet. My normal walking stride is about 2.5 feet. If I really stretch, maybe 3. This thing was taking casual steps that were 50% longer than anything I could manage, which meant it had to be tall, really tall, at least 7 feet, probably 8 or more. I followed the tracks for maybe half a mile into dense old-growth forest where the trees grew so thick that even in midday it felt dark. And then, the tracks just stopped. Not like the creature had turned around. They just ended, like whatever made them had vanished. That's when I noticed the tree. About 10 feet from where the tracks ended, there was a massive Douglas fir, and on the trunk, claw marks. Fresh, you could tell by the pale wood where the bark had been torn away. The marks ran vertically in parallel lines, 4 or 5 scratches, each about an inch apart, and they were high. The lowest scratch started at about 8 feet. The highest went up to at least 12 feet. I've seen bear scratches before. A big male grizzly can reach maybe 9 or 10 feet, but these marks went higher, and the spacing was different. The gouges were deep, cutting through bark into solid wood. I stood there looking at those marks, and for the first time, I felt a cold prickle running down my spine. Pause this right now at 4:15. Top left corner of your screen, behind that fallen log. Do you see the outline shift against the wind? Tell me what you see in the comments, because I'm still not convinced that's just a shadow. I pulled out my phone to check my GPS, make sure I knew exactly where I was. That's when I realized something else. The entire forest had gone silent. When I'd first started following the tracks, there had been normal sounds. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, branches creaking, snow falling from trees. Now there was nothing. Complete silence. I'm not someone who scares easily. I've encountered black bears. I've had a mountain lion stalk me for over a mile. I've weathered severe storms in the backcountry. But this silence triggered something primal. I stood there, barely breathing, listening. My hand moved instinctively to the bear spray on my hip, and then I heard it. If you've got headphones, use them now. The next sound is subtle, and it changes everything. From somewhere deeper in the forest, maybe 200 yards away, came a sound that made my blood freeze. It started as a low rumble, so deep I felt it in my chest as much as I heard it. Then it rose in pitch, becoming a long, drawn-out call that was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Not a bear. I've heard bears vocalize. This was different. Not a wolf or coyote. I've heard them howl hundreds of times. This was deeper, more complex. Not a mountain lion. They scream, high-pitched and eerie. This was nothing like that. This sound had structure, variation. It rose and fell in pitch with what seemed like deliberate patterning, and it went on for maybe 15 or 20 seconds before fading. When it stopped, the silence was even more oppressive. I waited, listening, watching the tree line. Nothing moved, but I knew something was out there. Something that had made those tracks. Something that had left those claw marks. Something that was making sounds I couldn't explain. Every instinct I possessed was telling me to leave. Right now, I didn't run. Running is almost always a mistake. It triggers prey responses. But I moved fast, retraced my steps back toward the ridge, moving as quickly as I could while staying careful. I kept looking back over my shoulder, scanning the forest. I never saw anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was tracking my movements from the shadows. It took me maybe 90 minutes to get back to camp. By the time I arrived, it was mid-afternoon. I was exhausted not from physical exertion, but from constant adrenaline. I stood at the edge of my campsite and looked around carefully before entering. Everything appeared normal. My tent was exactly where I'd left it. My gear was undisturbed. The fire pit had cold ashes, but as I walked into the clearing, I noticed something. New tracks around my tent. I approached them slowly, hand on my bear spray. The tracks were the same as the ones on the ridge. Massive, bipedal, human-shaped but much larger, and they circled my entire campsite. I followed them. They came from the south, approached my tent, then circled around it not once, but twice, like it was studying the layout. In a few places, the prints showed where the creature had stopped and stood. You could see where the snow had been compressed under its weight. One of these spots was right next to my tent. Whatever this thing was, it had stood there probably for several minutes, just feet from my gear. Close enough to smell my scent on the fabric, I checked my GPS watch. Based on the condition of the tracks, they'd been made within the last 2 or 3 hours, which meant while I was following its trail on the ridge, it had come here, to my camp. It had found me, and while I was tracking it, it was tracking me right back. I should have packed up right then, but it was already 3 p.m. Sunset would come around 5:30. I'd be hiking in darkness by 16 miles through difficult terrain, in the dark, knowing something large and unknown was out there. The risk of injury was high. The risk of getting lost was high. And if whatever was following me wanted to attack, darkness would give it every advantage. So I made a decision. Stay, fortify my camp, build a big fire, keep weapons ready, wait for daylight. I spent the next 2 hours preparing, gathered enough firewood to keep a blaze going all night, repositioned my tent with the creek at its back and clear sightlines, checked my revolver, prepared bear spray and knife, set them within reach. As the sun set and darkness fell, I built up my fire until it was roaring bright enough to light up my entire campsite. Then I sat with my back against a tree, facing the forest, and waited. The first few hours were quiet. I sat by the fire, feeding it wood, watching the tree line. Around 8 p.m., I ate dinner. Freeze-dried food I barely tasted. Around 9 p.m., I heard coyotes in the distance. Their yipping was oddly comforting, normal sounds. Around 10 p.m., even the coyotes went quiet. And at 11:47 p.m., I know the exact time because I was checking my watch constantly, I heard the first branch snap. It came from the north, maybe 50 or 60 yards out. The sound of a large branch breaking under weight. Crack. Sharp and clear. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, pointed it in that direction. The beam didn't penetrate far, just reflected back off snow and trees. I waited. Nothing. Then at 11:58 p.m., 11 minutes later, another branch snapped from the east. I spun around, shining my flashlight. Still nothing visible. At 12:09 a.m., another snap from the south. 11 minutes exactly. At 12:20 a.m., the west. Right on schedule. It was circling my camp, methodically, deliberately. And those 11-minute intervals weren't random. That was planned, calculated. I realized then that I was dealing with something intelligent, something that was studying me, testing me. The circling pattern continued for over an hour. Every 11 minutes, a branch would snap from a different cardinal direction. North, east, south, west. Over and over, I kept my fire built up as high as I could. The flames were probably 8 or 9 feet high, way bigger than safe. But I didn't care about fire safety. I cared about having light. A barrier. Around 1:30 a.m., the branch snapping stopped. For the next 2 hours, complete silence. No sounds, no movement. I didn't let my guard down. I stayed alert, watching, listening. Part of me started to hope maybe it was gone. Then at 3:47 a.m., I'll never forget that time I heard footsteps. They were coming from the north. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Each step made a distinct crunch in the snow. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Pause. The cadence was slow, maybe one step every 4 or 5 seconds. Like whatever was making them was in no hurry. Confident, I grabbed my revolver. My hand was shaking. The footsteps kept coming. Closer, closer. Then they stopped. Maybe 20 or 25 feet from my fire, just outside the brightest ring of light. I stared into the darkness. My flashlight beam caught something movement in the shadows, a large, dark shape between the trees. Then, I heard breathing. It was deep, slow, rhythmic, 8 or 9 seconds between each breath, way slower than human breathing, and loud enough that I could hear it clearly over the crackling of my fire. Whatever was out there was huge, and it was just standing there, watching me. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Me, standing by my fire with a gun and flashlight. It, standing in the darkness, breathing, watching. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20. Time seemed to stop. Then, it made a sound, not a growl, not a roar. Vocalization, complex vocalization. It started low and guttural, then rose in pitch with clear modulation. Different tones, different patterns, like it was speaking. The sound lasted maybe 6 or 7 seconds, then stopped, and from somewhere behind my tent from the south something answered, a different voice. Higher pitched, slightly different rhythm, but clearly responding. There were at least 2 of them, and they were communicating. About me. I spun around, trying to watch both directions at once. The vocalizations continued, back and forth. The one to my north would make a sound. The one to my south would respond. Sometimes the patterns were similar, sometimes different, but it was clearly communication, not random animal noises. This went on for maybe 10 minutes. Then both sounds stopped. The breathing to my north continued for another minute. Then that stopped too, and then footsteps, moving away, back into the forest to the north. I waited, listening to the footsteps fade, straining to hear any sound from the south. Nothing. They were gone. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I sat by my fire, feeding it wood, watching the darkness, until the first gray light of dawn began filtering through the trees around 6:30 a.m. When it was light enough to see clearly, I examined my campsite. The tracks were everywhere. The one from the north had approached to within about 20 feet of my fire. I could see where it had stood in one spot, the snow compressed deep under its weight. From that spot, it had a clear view of everything. The tracks from the south had stopped about 30 feet away. This one had also stood in one spot for a while. Based on the tracks, both creatures were at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. The stride length was incredible, 4.5 feet, sometimes 5. But what really terrified me was what I found 15 feet from my tent. Something had built a structure while I slept. A cairn, a deliberate stack of rocks, each one about the size of my fist, piled into a small tower about 2 feet high. I examined it carefully. The rocks weren't from the immediate area they'd been gathered and brought here, and they were stacked with precision, not just tossed in a pile, but carefully balanced. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. It said, "We were here while you slept. We could have done anything. We're letting you know." I stood there looking at that cairn for probably 5 minutes, and I finally accepted what I'd been trying to deny. I wasn't being hunted. I was being evaluated. I needed to get out. Now. I broke camp faster than I'd ever broken camp in my life. Didn't bother folding things neatly. Just stuffed everything in my pack and started moving. It was 7:45 a.m. when I left and started the hike back toward my truck. 16 miles. If I pushed hard, I could make it by early evening. Before dark, for the first hour, I moved as fast as I could through the snow. My ankle was sore from yesterday's scrambling, but adrenaline kept me going. I kept looking over my shoulder, but I didn't see anything. Around 9 a.m., I heard the first wood knocking. It was distinctive, 3 sharp impacts, like someone hitting a tree with a heavy stick. Knock, knock, knock. The sound came from my left, maybe 100 yards away. It echoed through the forest and faded. A few seconds later, an answering pattern from my right. Same thing, 3 knocks. They were tracking me, flanking me on both sides. I kept moving, walking faster. The knocking continued, sometimes from ahead, sometimes behind. Always from multiple directions. They were coordinating, using those sounds to communicate my position. Around 10:30 a.m., I realized they were herding me, pushing me in a specific direction. Every time I tried to adjust my route, the knocking would intensify from that side. And then I saw where they were pushing me. Ahead, the terrain dropped sharply into a ravine, maybe 20 or 25 feet deep, steep rocky walls covered in snow and ice, with a narrow creek bed at the bottom. This wasn't on my planned route. In my panic, I'd veered off course. Now, I was at the edge with no easy way around. Behind me, the wood knocking stopped. The forest went completely silent. And then footsteps. Multiple sets. coming from different directions, all converging. I spun around, looking for them, but couldn't see anything yet. Just movement in the trees, shadows getting closer. Then they appeared, 3 of them, stepping out from the tree line simultaneously, maybe 60 or 70 yards away. They were massive. Even at that distance, I could see how huge they were. 8 feet tall at least, maybe 9, covered in dark, shaggy fur that looked almost black in the shadows. They stood upright on 2 legs, walked like humans, but with a different gait, more fluid, more powerful. Their arms were longer than human arms, hanging down past their waists. The one in the center was the biggest. Its shoulders were incredibly broad. Its head was large and slightly conical at the top, like a gorilla's sagittal crest. For a long moment, we all just stood there, them watching me watching them, neither side moving. Then, the big one in the center took a step forward, just one deliberate step, and I saw its face clearly. The face was not human, but it wasn't purely ape either. Something in between. Something evolution might have created if it had taken a different path. Heavy brow ridge, massive jaw, flat, wide nose, large teeth visible when it opened its mouth slightly. But it was the eyes that got me. Dark, almost black, but there was intelligence there. Awareness. It was looking at me not the way an animal looks at prey, but the way one intelligent being studies another. It tilted its head slightly, curious. Then it made a sound, 1 syllable, low and deep, almost like a word. The other 2 responded. They stepped forward, moving to flank the leader, all 3 advancing toward me, slowly, deliberately, like they had all the time in the world. I looked at the ravine behind me. 20-foot drop onto rocks and ice. I'd probably break bones. Then I looked at the 3 creatures getting closer. I made my choice. I turned and jumped. For a split second, I was airborne. Then I hit the slope and started sliding, tumbling, grabbing at anything. My pack caught on a branch and got torn half off. Rocks scraped my hands and face, but I kept sliding, out of control, down toward the bottom. I hit the rocky creek bed hard. Pain exploded in my left ankle. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then I heard a sound from above. From the rim of the ravine came a deep, rumbling sound. From all 3 of them, a low vocalization that lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds. It sounded almost like amusement, not human laughter, but something similar, a sound of entertainment. They had been hurting me here, watching me panic, and now they were amused by my desperate escape. I forced myself to my feet. My ankle screamed with pain, but I could still walk, barely. I looked up at the ravine rim. All 3 creatures were standing there, looking down at me, just watching. They didn't follow. They didn't try to climb down. They just stood there, watching me limp away. And that was somehow more terrifying than if they'd chased me. I followed the creek bed for what felt like hours, limping, stumbling, forcing myself to keep moving. My ankle was badly sprained, maybe broken. Every step was agony. Eventually, the ravine widened and flattened. I was able to climb out. I found myself in a valley I recognized. The trail I'd originally taken was about a mile east. I checked my GPS. Roughly 8 miles from my truck, 8 miles with a destroyed ankle. But I was back on familiar ground. I couldn't see the creatures anymore, couldn't hear them. For the first time in hours, the forest seemed normal again. Birds, small animals, normal sounds. Had they given up? Or were they still following, just staying out of sight? I didn't know, but I kept moving. By the time the sun started setting, I'd only covered about 5 more miles. My ankle was swelling badly. I could barely put weight on it. I was exhausted, dehydrated, starting to worry about hypothermia. 3 miles left, just 3 miles to my truck. But it was getting dark, fast. I had to make a decision. Try to push through in darkness with a bad ankle, probably injuring myself worse, or camp one more night and finish at first light. I found a rock overhang about 50 feet off the trail, not quite a cave, but enough shelter. I could build a fire at the entrance, create a barrier. I gathered what firewood I could find, not much with my ankle, and built the biggest fire I could manage. Then I settled in and waited. And here's where something happened that I still can't explain. My watch recorded my heart rate at 164 beats per minute, and I was sitting perfectly still. They showed up at 11:47 p.m., the exact same time they'd started circling 2 nights before. The wood knocking began, from all directions, north, south, east, west. But this time, there were more of them. I counted at least 5 distinct positions. They stayed back in the forest, just beyond my firelight. I could see shapes moving between the trees, shadows that were too large, too tall. The vocalizations started around midnight. Different voices, different patterns. They were communicating, discussing something. Maybe discussing me? I grabbed a burning stick from my fire and held it out like a weapon. My hands were shaking. The sounds continued for maybe 20 minutes. Then they started moving closer. I could see them now, 5 of them, maybe more, all massive, all moving in unison toward my position. I waved my burning stick at them. "Stay back, I'm warning you." They stopped, right at the edge of my firelight, all of them standing in a rough semicircle, looking at me. The biggest one, the leader from before, was in the center. It stepped forward one more pace, closer to the fire, closer to me. Its eyes reflected the firelight, glowing like embers. We stared at each other, and then something happened. The creature made a sound, quiet, almost gentle, a soft, low vocalization that didn't sound aggressive at all. The others responded with similar sounds, soft, calm. Then the leader turned and walked away, back into the darkness. One by one, the others followed. Within a minute, they were all gone. I could hear their footsteps fading, the vocalizations getting more distant, and then silence. They had left, really left. I didn't sleep, couldn't. I sat by my fire all night, jumping at every sound. But they didn't come back. When dawn came, I added more wood to my fire, ate the last of my food, and started moving. 3 miles. My ankle was in terrible shape, but adrenaline and the knowledge that I was almost out kept me going. I limped along the trail, using a stick as a crutch, stopping every few minutes to rest. By 10 a.m., I could see the parking area through the trees. My truck. I've never been so relieved to see a vehicle in my entire life. I limped across the parking area, fumbling with my keys, and finally got the door open. I collapsed into the driver's seat and just sat there for a minute, breathing, trying to process everything. Then, I looked back at the trailhead one last time, and I saw it. Standing at the edge of the forest, maybe 100 feet away, was the leader. The big one, just standing there, in broad daylight. Not hiding, just watching me. We looked at each other for what felt like a long time, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Then it did something. It lifted one massive hand, slowly, the arm raised, the hand extended, and it made a gesture. The hand moved. Once, twice. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't aggressive, but I couldn't tell you what it meant. A signal, an acknowledgement, something I still can't translate. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, and was gone. I started my truck and drove away. Didn't stop until I was back in Boise, back in civilization. I went to a hospital, severely sprained ankle, but not broken. They gave me crutches and painkillers and told me I was lucky. Lucky, right. For 3 days, I didn't tell anyone what really happened. Just said I'd had a rough trip. Bad weather, tough terrain, ankle injury. Everyone accepted that. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Those creatures, that intelligence, that final gesture. It's been almost a year now since that trip. I still work as a wilderness guide, but I'm more cautious now, more aware. I've spent hundreds of hours researching Bigfoot reports, reading accounts from other people who've had encounters, and what I've found is disturbing. There are patterns, consistent patterns across decades of sightings from people who've never met each other. The wood knocking, the circling behavior, the vocalizations that sound like communication, the sense of being studied rather than hunted, the final gesture of acknowledgement. All of these elements appear over and over again. Either there's a massive conspiracy of people making up incredibly consistent stories, or these things are real, and they've been hiding in our forests for centuries, maybe longer. I'm telling this story now because I think people need to know, not to scare them, not to keep them out of the wilderness. I still love the backcountry, but to make them aware. The world is bigger and stranger than we usually acknowledge. If you're going into the deep wilderness, really deep, days from the nearest road, watch for the signs. Tracks that don't match any known animal. The forest going completely silent for no apparent reason. Vocalizations that don't sound like anything you recognize. Structures built from rocks or sticks that look deliberate. That unmistakable sensation of being watched by intelligent eyes. Pay attention. Trust your instincts. Don't dismiss them as imagination. What I learned in those 5 days is that our ancestors were right to respect the deep forest. Not because it's evil, but because it's home to things we don't understand. Things that deserve our respect and caution. I saw one of those things, multiple times, up close, and I'll never forget the intelligence in its eyes. The curiosity, the awareness. Whatever these creatures are, they're not mindless animals. They're something else. Something that's been sharing this planet with us, watching us, studying us, and choosing to stay hidden. And somewhere in the Selkirk Mountains of northern Idaho, they're still there. Still watching, still waiting, still keeping their secrets. So that's what I experienced. What I saw. You can believe it or not. That's your choice. All I can tell you is what happened. Make of it what you will.